I thought my neighbor only stopped by to borrow sugar. Instead, he walked into my living room holding a small wooden box that shouldn't have existed anymore, my mother's handwriting on the lid, my name on a yellowed label. A storm rolled over the neighborhood, the lights went out, and one careful question from him changed how I think about love, grief, and second chances. You won't believe what was inside or what we chose to do next. Before I begin, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? What city? Drop it in the comments so I can picture your skyline as I tell this. It was a Tuesday and it felt like a Sunday. Quiet, a little too long, the kind of afternoon that makes clocks seem rude. I'd opened every window in the house to coax in the faintest breeze, and the living room smelled like rain before it even started. The old ceiling fan ticked like a lazy metronome. I was sitting cross-legged on the rug, sorting papers nobody ever wants to sort, insurance statements, estate forms, a stapled stack of final bills. The paperwork that follows you even when you no longer live here. My mother's handwriting, small, tidy, a little tilted, showed up here and there in the margins. Emily, don't forget to call the plumber. Buy the good napkins if company comes. Be kind to yourself today. She had a way of putting love into ordinary sentences. My phone was on the coffee table, face down, silent, like it knew better than to interrupt. The TV remote sat beside it, pointed at nothing. A framed 4th of July photo. Me and the cul-de-sac kids, paper plates balanced on our knees, tilted slightly in its stand. Outside, the maple across the street was the particular green that only happens right before a storm. I remember thinking, if I can get through just one more folder, I'll make tea. Maybe peppermint. Maybe something stronger. Then the doorbell rang, 2 quick notes, like someone clearing their throat. When I opened the door, Stephen stood there, my neighbor from 3 houses down, the one with the honest laugh and the porch swing that's never empty on summer evenings. He had rain in his hair and a small wooden box in his hands. It was the size of a loaf of bread, darker at the corners where people's fingers must have worried at it over the years. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and there was a faint smudge of sawdust along his forearm, as if he'd leaned against his workbench and forgotten about it. "Hey, Emily," he said, the way people say your name when they're checking to see if you're really all right. "Do you have a minute?" I stepped back and motioned him in without thinking. We have that kind of neighborhood, the kind where you carry a spare casserole dish and people wave even when they're late. He paused on the doormat, looked at his shoes, then at the rug, and asked, "Shoes off?" The question was so considerate it made my throat tighten. Consent in the smallest things matters. If someone asks before they even cross your threshold, you feel safer about everything else that might come after. "Shoes are fine," I said. The rug is already losing a battle with paper clips. He smiled and walked into the living room, careful, like a tall man moving through a museum. He set the box on the coffee table with both hands, and for a second he just looked at it, as if he were handing over not a thing, but a note he hadn't written. Then he turned it so I could see the label. It was yellowed, the glue giving up around the edges, and there, in my mother's tidy print, was my name. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when a memory steps in, like even the air wants to make space. "Where did you get that?" I asked, though I recognized the box itself. It used to sit on the top shelf of my mother's closet, behind a stack of sun hats, back when she was still well enough to tease me for borrowing her scarves without asking. "They've been clearing out the HOA storage," he said. "Old boxes, things left behind over the years. I volunteered because I've got the truck and the time." He gave a little shrug, the kind a man gives when he doesn't want to make a production out of doing the right thing. "This one had your mom's name taped to the lid, and yours on the label under it. I can leave it if now isn't a good time." "It's a fine time," I said, though my hands were shaking. In fact, it might be exactly the time. We sat on opposite sides of the table like two people about to play a card game nobody wins. Rain began to pepper the windows. First a soft tapping, then a drum roll. In the kitchen, the fridge hummed. In the hall, the thermostat clicked like it was clearing its throat. I ran my finger along the seam where the lid met the sides. The wood was smooth, oiled, kept with care. My mother had loved things with history. Well-made furniture, linen with a story, anything that could outlast its first purpose. "May I?" I asked. It felt right to ask, even though it was my name on the label. It's a soft habit I've tried to keep, remembering that even when something belongs to you, the moment of sharing it belongs to both people in the room. "Of course," Stephen said, and he leaned back, palms on his knees, as if to make more space between him and my history. The lid lifted with a gentle sigh, the scent of cedar rising up like a memory of winter. On top lay a folded piece of floral stationery, the kind you can't buy anymore unless you travel to a small shop where the owner knows your name. Under that, a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case, labeled in blue ink, "For Emmy, when the rain sounds like it did in '98. Beneath the tape, something wrapped in tissue paper, the edges softened from years of breathe out, breathe in waiting. I looked at the tape and laughed, not because it was funny, but because my life has never been organized around the kind of technology that keeps. "Do you know anyone with a cassette player anymore?" I asked. Stephen rubbed the back of his neck. "I do," he said. "I keep one in the garage for the tapes we use at the community center, old instruction recordings, some music. I didn't bring it, thinking this was just a drop-off. But I could get it, if you want. Only if you want." He said it the way a man says, "Can I hold your hand?" when a storm is already shaking the windows. I nodded. "Yes," I said quietly. "I want." He looked relieved and something like grateful. "Back in 10, he promised. "Do you want me to lock the door on my way out?" "Leave it," I said, and the word felt like a kind of trust I hadn't had to give in a long time. By the time he came back, the storm had moved from rumor to fact. The maple across the street was bending like it was greeting someone it respected. Stephen held up the cassette player, square, gray, with big friendly buttons, and an extension cord like a ribbon. He set everything up on the coffee table and glanced at me, waiting, his hand hovering over the stop/eject button. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I answered, though the truth was closer to almost. He pressed play. The machine clicked, whirred, and then my living room filled with the small steadiness of my mother's voice. "Hi, Emmy," she said, and my name inside that voice wove time into a loop. You can't mistake the sound of someone who knew you when your knees were all bruises and your laughter had no brakes. She didn't say dramatic things. That wasn't her way. She talked about the rain, about how it makes houses honest. She told me to keep a blanket folded on the arm of the couch, because you never know when someone will need a little warmth. She reminded me to check the batteries in the flashlight once a month, and to buy the good vanilla, because life is short and cookies are long. Her voice did that thing voices do when people sit alone with their thoughts, softening, strengthening, circling back. "Emmy," the tape said, and Stephen looked at the carpet like he was giving us privacy. "If you're listening, it means I'm not there to nag you about the furnace filter. You're stronger than you think. When the rain sounds like it did in '98, open the paper inside the box. Not before." A low sound of thunder rolled over the house. I felt silly for looking at the windows as if the sky might nod at me and say, "Yes, this qualifies." But sometimes you want permission that isn't ambiguous. The lamp in the corner flickered once, like a wink, and then the house went dark with a soft thump. the kind of power loss that turns everything in the room into itself. "I've got matches," Stephen said, a calmness to him that felt like a blanket thrown over the shoulders of the moment. He found the kitchen drawer without asking and lit 2 candles, then a third. Their small gold light made the frames on the shelves look like they were warming from the inside out. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding out one of the candles for me to take. The light made his eyes look younger, the kind of tired that comes from living fully, not from giving up. "I am," I said, and realized it was true. "I would like to read what's inside." "Would you like me to stay?" His voice didn't sit in the middle of the question. It leaned back, giving me room to choose. Consent again, in the shape of a question, in the doorway of a fragile moment. "Yes," I said. "Please." I unfolded the floral stationery first. It was a short note, just a few lines, my mother's hand steady and practical. "Emmy, if the rain is loud and you're feeling small, remember the big things you've done with your small hands. There's something wrapped for you. Don't forget to breathe before you look." I breathed, because when your mother tells you to do something, some part of you will always obey. The tissue paper felt like petals. Inside was a small wooden carving, smooth as a river stone, the shape of a house, simple and perfect, with a tiny heart carved into the front door. On the back, in pencil, "Home isn't a place. It's a person you let in." I ran my thumb over the heart, and it warmed under my skin. "Your mother was something," Stephen said, and his voice was careful, as if he were walking across a creek on stones. "She'd have liked you," I said, surprising myself by knowing it. "She liked people who asked before they reached for things." Thunder answered in the distance. The candles hiccuped and held. "Would you mind if I sat a little closer?" he asked. "Just because the light is better here, and you shouldn't have to hold the candle alone." I moved a stack of folders and nodded. He sat at the other end of the couch, an easy arm's length, and turned the candle so the flame gentled toward us. We listened to the tape a little more, my mother telling a story I thought I'd forgotten about a roadside peach stand we stopped at once, the summer I learned to drive. She ended with a small laugh and the soft click of the recorder button, like a curtain pull shut. When the tape whirred to a stop, the room got very quiet. I heard the rain flatten and felt the slow relief that follows a storm, the house settling back onto its foundation like a woman into a chair. I set the carving in my lap and looked at Stephen. He didn't fill the silence. He let it be, which might be the kindest thing a person can do. "I've been avoiding this part of the boxes," I said. "The part where you find the things you'd forgotten had weight." "I know a little about weight," he said. "My wife passed 5 years ago. People think grief is a suitcase you set down when your arms get tired. It's more like a coat you learn to wear without noticing. And then one day you realize you're warm again, and you don't feel guilty about it." I looked at him. "That sounds exactly right." He nodded at the small wooden house in my hands. "May I see?" he asked. I held it out. His fingers met mine, and he paused, not from hesitation, but from courtesy. The touch was warm, steady, and uncomplicated. If you've ever had someone touch your hand like it's a promise to do no harm, you know how that can loosen something tight in the chest. He turned the carving over and smiled at the pencil words. "Your mother knew how to write a truth you could live in," he said, passing it back, slowly enough that it didn't feel like a handoff, but like a decision returned. We sat there for a while, just breathing candle air. The power was still out, but the room didn't feel empty. It felt like it had more in it than when we'd started, more light, more story, more of the good kind of hush. "I have tea," I said, "and a kettle that will not oblige us at the moment. But I do have a thermos I filled earlier, because habit is a strange blessing." He laughed, and it landed in the room like a nail driven straight and true. "I would be honored to drink your premeditated tea," he said. We poured and drank and let the heat find us. He told me about the community center woodshop and the way teenage boys forget they have hands until you put a lathe in front of them. I told him about the boxes and how some pages feel heavier than others, even when they weigh the same. The rain softened, but we didn't rush to notice. At some point, when the last candle stub had collapsed into itself and the room smelled faintly of wax and peppermint, Stephen looked at the open box again. "There's something under the tissue," he said, and then he stopped because he'd seen my face, and he realized I'd seen it too. An envelope, cream-colored, tucked flat against the bottom, my name on the front in the firm, patient penmanship that taught me to take my time on grocery lists. "Do you want to?" he asked, and then he lifted his hands, palms open, a gesture that said I won't touch a thing unless you tell me so. "I do," I said, and I placed the carving down carefully, as if it could feel bumps. My fingers found the edge of the flap, but I didn't open it yet. I looked at Stephen, at the candlelight making a kind of kindness out of the evening, at the box that had somehow traveled across years and storage rooms to land on my table today. "Would you?" I began and then laughed, the small relieved kind you make when your heart's heavy and someone steady is within arm's reach. "Would you stay while I read it?" "I would," he said, like a vow, simple and unadorned. Before I broke the seal, he asked, "Emily, are you sure?" "No hurry." "I'm sure," I said, and meant it in all the ways that count. "But before I do, can I ask you something?" "Anything," he said. "When you walked in carrying this box," I said, "what did you hope would happen?" He thought about it. "I hoped you'd feel less alone with it," he said. "And I hoped you'd let me be the kind of neighbor who doesn't just wave from the porch." I nodded. "That sounds like exactly what I needed." The house clicked. Somewhere, a breaker tried to remember its purpose. We both looked toward the kitchen, then back to the envelope. The storm had moved on, leaving the air washed and honest. In the quiet that followed, I slipped a finger under the flap as carefully as if it were skin, breathed the way my mother had told me to, and lifted. What I saw first wasn't the words. It was another name, in the salutation, written beside mine. And it made my heart step forward like it had heard its name called across a crowded room. I looked up at Stephen, the candle's last inch making a gold ring on the table. "You might want to sit closer," I said, my voice steady now. "It looks like this one is addressed to both of us." The candlelight made the paper glow as if the words were written in fire. My mother's handwriting stretched across the page with its familiar tilt, steady as though she had written it yesterday. But what stunned me wasn't just her voice in ink. It was the salutation at the top. "For Emily and Stephen." I froze, and Stephen leaned a little closer, squinting, unsure if he'd read it right. She wrote my name." His voice was careful, almost apologetic, as if he thought he might be intruding on something that wasn't his. I nodded, my throat dry. "That's what it says." The rain had slowed outside, but the house still hummed with the silence that follows storms. I unfolded the paper all the way and began to read aloud, because somehow the words felt too heavy to carry alone. "My sweet Emmy, and you too, Stephen, if life has been kind enough to bring you into her living room." Stephen's breath caught. He set his teacup down slowly, like it might break under the weight of the moment. I kept reading, my voice shaking. "I know this might sound strange, but neighbors, Emmy, can be more than people who cut the lawn beside yours. They can be the ones who hold up the sky when you're too tired to. If Stephen is still around, I trust him to be that kind of neighbor for you. And Stephen, if you're reading this, don't let her fold into herself. She's stronger than she knows, but she sometimes forgets to ask for company when the rain comes. I lowered the letter and let the silence breathe. Stephen had leaned back into the couch cushion, staring at the flickering candle, his jaw tight. "She knew me," he said finally. "But I only met your mother a handful of times." "She knew enough," I said, folding the letter gently against my knee. My mother had a way of seeing people quickly, like she could read the future from how you stirred your coffee. Stephen chuckled softly, then rubbed his face with both hands. I remember one of those times. She asked me, right on the sidewalk, if I was taking care of myself. I thought she meant vitamins or exercise. But she clarified. She said, "I mean, are you letting anyone see the real weight you carry?" I didn't know how to answer her. "She probably already knew the answer," I said. "She just wanted you to hear the question out loud." The letter continued with small instructions. Practical, loving, ordinary magic. Make space for laughter in your living room, even if it means moving stacks of paper. Share tea with someone who looks like they might say no. And remember, home is not the walls. It's the courage to let someone in. The last line, written a little shakier, read, "Emmy, don't be afraid to let kindness sit on your couch." I pressed my lips together, and the tears finally came. Not a flood, just a steady, honest release. Stephen reached over, not quickly, not carelessly, and let his hand hover, giving me the choice. I turned my palm up, and he set his hand in mine, steady and warm. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't pity. It was simply human, and that made it more powerful than either.